Well, welcome to session 4 of the 2023 NOVA conference. This session is on the deeper roots of transformation, which is the culmination of our conference in every sense. I'm Susan Prescott, Director of the NOVA Network and Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia, and it's my pleasure to be chairing the conference. To open the session, we are really excited to share some more of the submissions to the NOVA Art Awards. We shared part 1 this morning, and if you missed it, we'll be posting these and all of the talks from our other sessions, hopefully in the next week or so. And the prize winners will also be announced at the end of this session. This is just a 2-minute video with the art set to music, so please enjoy that. Thanks, Lachlan. Thank you all for those submissions. And now it is my pleasure to invite Rick Scott to guide us through a mindful moment to bring us all into a connected heart-mind space for our time together. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Susan. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position and just take a moment to calm our bodies and minds. Take a few relaxing breaths to center into this space. And if you would like to, gently close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. Allow your breathing to be natural and relaxed. No need to change your breathing in any way. Just allowing yourself to be fully present in this moment. Now, in this space of stillness, I invite you to bring your awareness to your heart center and to a feeling of warmth and the loving presence that resides within and all around each of us. And if you would like to, invite in spirit, whatever that means to you. Let's immerse ourselves in this warmth, love, and light that connects us all as we sit in silence for a few moments. And now, imagine our love and light extending and radiating to all of us in this community, and to beings everywhere in the world, those near and far, those known and unknown. And when you're ready, return your attention to this space. Gently open your eyes, feeling relaxed and refreshed.
Well, thank you, Rick, for bringing us into this moment, not just for that, but for opening all of our sessions in this really important way. And I think these moments of quietness and connection are much more significant than we realize, and we should do it more often. So in this session, like all of our sessions, there'll be a series of short talks by the panelists, followed by the opportunity for discussion. We've got 10 speakers, and we will plan, if time permits, for a pause for a discussion rather, after the first 5 talks to capture any immediate questions or reflections. And then we'll have another discussion at the end after the second 5. And these discussions will be open to everybody. So I'm going to begin with my 5-minute introduction to set the scene and to introduce our first speaker. Thank you very much. Most of us want to make a meaningful difference in the world and discover our own purpose, happiness and fulfillment in the process. The challenges in the world today have brought us to a point where deeper, more profound changes are required. It's no longer simply changing what we're doing, but considering more deeply how we do things. Our technology has vastly outpaced the social and spiritual evolution we need to apply it wisely. It's time that we address these dimensions of human consciousness in solving our grand challenges. And this applies equally across all facets of life and all sectors of society. This is the new frontier, and it requires visionary leadership, the kind of leadership that reinforces this frame shift and empowers people from the inside out, that elevates the best of human nature and encourages our shared human potential in the spirit of co-creation. The growing research on spiritual leadership is encouraging. Initially in the context of religion, it has now been applied to management and organizational science. Many studies have now shown that influence through vision, values, and relationships is far better than influence through fear, power, and control. As described by pioneer researcher Lewis Fry, this means incorporating vision, hope, faith, and altruistic love for intrinsic motivation, empowerment, and congruence. In organizations, this is to ultimately foster higher levels of commitment and productivity. But regardless of context, there is a strong focus on care, ethics, values, meaning, and positive interpersonal relationships. Gilbert Fairholm, another influential researcher in this field, has argued that values-based spiritual leadership is the only way to do leadership in today's globalized, multi-differentiated world. He also describes the evolution of leadership theory over the last century from the focus on who the leader is to leadership much more rooted in values, and he argues that the next new wave must be more spiritual leadership. And we've already seen a clear transition from leadership-centered workplaces to human-centered workplaces and the emergence of more values-based behaviours. We've seen this reflected in the growing focus on sustainability, both in ecological and emotional terms. New studies show that spiritual leadership has positive influences on sustainability in the workplace, as well as on individuals' behaviour more widely. But there's also a deeper shift to restore the more conscious connections and deeper relationships between people, places, and planet, in what has been described as more unity of consciousness and collective self-awareness. This is about bringing out the best in everyone. But if we look around the world today, we still see that the loudest voices are often not the wisest. We've previously discussed the dark triad characteristics of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These traits are on a continuum, but in international population studies, about 7% have these traits above a threshold for dominance. Dark triads are often overrepresented in politics, corporations, and in the social media public square. But on the positive, quite literally, it is important to illuminate the other side of this equation that we hear far less about, the light triad. The characteristics of a light triad include, firstly, faith in humanity, or trusting in a fundamental goodness. Secondly, humanism, believing in the dignity and worth of each person. And thirdly, Kantianism, which adheres to a universal moral law of authenticity, refusing to objectify or manipulate others. The good news is that at least 50% of the international population samples qualify as light triads, and that the average person has more light than dark traits. These are the people that inspire us to be better, kinder, and optimistic, a phenomenon called moral elevation, by which mere proximity to moral beauty makes us feel more uplifted and even experience physiological shifts. And it's very important that we cultivate and value this, especially in young people, because that is how we can have a long-term influence on population trends. It also reinforces the importance of co-creating a space for connecting and exploring in deeper ways to magnify this. Even small efforts like this can have ripple effects that contribute to that deeper transition by reinforcing the value of kinder, wiser, and more enlightened ways of being, which can only truly be achieved from the inside out. There is so much turbulence on the surface of life that it is even more important to be able to dive beneath the waves towards the awareness of a deeper universal knowing and connection to the unavoidable unity of all things, into the subatomic mystery that somehow contains the fractals of the entire universe. If we can bring this wonder and awareness more to the surface of our lives, it may help calm the turbulence within us and around us. We're here to experience this marvelous and sometimes confusing mosaic of life, but this deeper awareness can help us realize that we are all co-creating what is happening in the world, and that we have the power to choose something better with less fear, less judgment, and more love. And that is the perfect transition to our next speaker, Jude Currivan, who will take up the conversation from here, a physicist, cosmologist, and futurist who exemplifies the light triad, a light worker in every sense. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be together. And thank you, Rick, because it's so important now that we come together in that silence where we remember the wholeness of who we really are. So I'd like to use my time to begin to share some emergent understanding of what we're describing here. First of all, of course, the Nova Institute for Health. And the root word for health is the root word for whole. And yet it seems to me that, as Susan has explained, for various reasons, we actually have a collective dis-ease of separation at the moment. And that's a dis-ease that's been growing and continuing for the last period of time. And for me as a cosmologist, it's really founded on our worldview, because our worldviews affect our values. They drive our behaviors. So if our worldview is fragmented, then so will be our behaviors, and so will be, to that extent, our values. So we've been working together, I think, for a period of time, not just us here, of course, but humanity, to try and come together, to try and cooperate more. But if we're still coming from a fragmented worldview, those efforts are by their nature more about trying to deal with the symptoms of the dis-ease rather than the causation of the dis-ease. So what I'd like to share, and I'm sure my fellow speakers will share all together now, is the potential for transformational change, because the paradigm that we were brought up with, I think most of us were brought up with, I certainly was based on a science of materialism and separation. It basically described a universe bereft of meaning and intrinsic purpose. It talked of the processes of evolution as somehow accidental, and that over a vast amount of time, those evolutionary progress was able to arrive at biological organisms such as us that have consciousness, and that somehow our consciousness arises from our material brains, even though our consciousness may be deemed to be immaterial. But that's the worldview we've been inhabiting, and that's really based on a very mechanistic 19th century science. But all our structures have come from that. Our governance, our organizations, even our healthcare, our education, all of that. And now it's been completely turned on its head, because leading edge science and discoveries and scientific breakthroughs at all scales of evidence and existence and across numerous fields of research are revealing a vastly expanded understanding of the nature of reality. What it's revealing to us, in fact, is converging with universal wisdom teachings and spiritually based teachings to offer an emergent cosmology of a living universe, therefore a sentient universe that meaningfully exists and purposefully evolves as a non-locally unified entity. Now, what this does is enables us to ground our understanding in much more fundamental realms of intelligence and causation and meaning and purpose. And what it does is, it seems to me, is offer us a way home to remembering who we really are. It offers us a way of healing our fragmented worldview into a whole worldview, which, as I say, is convergent with universal and spiritually based teachings, but is based on the latest scientific evidence, to such an extent that I keep going back, I'm very old, the 2022 Nobel Prize in physics was given to 3 researchers who had been studying the universal, non-local, unified nature of reality for decades. Now, the Nobel Prize is only given to settled science. So there is no controversy that our universe isn't whole. The controversy is trying to continue to persuade us that it isn't. But we now are in a time, a wonderful opportunity, a time of threshold, where we can literally remember to this wholeness. And what this enables us to do is to articulate a unitive narrative. As Susan said, this unitive awareness, as we embrace it and embrace its opportunity, enables us to articulate a unitive narrative. And because we're a story-sharing species, we've told stories around hearths for as long as perhaps it's meant to be human. But latterly, those stories have been based on fragmentation and materiality and separation. We now have the opportunity to tell new stories, a newly evidenced unitive narrative that can underpin and frame transformational change in the world. We can put unitive in front of anything we want to do, from the being of it into the doing of it, whether it's the transformation into unitive economics, living economics that serve the good of the whole of people and planet and all the children of our planetary home. It can be unitive education, where we literally bring forward the remembering of children that they are whole, that they are wonderful, beautiful beings of light. It can bring the understanding into unitive healthcare, not just into well-being, but to whole being, where every aspect of who we are is nurtured and welcomed into a lived wholeness. So this is, for me, as a cosmologist who's been, walking this path since I was a very young child, an incredibly exciting and hopeful moment, because this emergent cosmology of a living, non-locally unified universe is such that mind and consciousness aren't something we have. They are literally what we and the whole world are. And it is a cosmology, whereas Jessica teaches the natural patterns that all systems, that all living systems exhibit are universal, and they play out through us too. The whole being work that Paul has done and the multidimensional understanding of our consciousness is natural for us within this emergent understanding. We literally are microcosmic co-creators of a meaningful, existing, purposefully evolving universe. And to just go back to Rick, I loved that you brought us to our breath. And when I was growing up, as I suspect most of us were, I was taught that our universe began as a big bang. And we know it wasn't big. That's always been facetious. But the implied chaos of a bang is a beginning that now we realize is fundamentally wrong. Instead, our universe began in its minute, minuscule origin 13.8 billion years ago, not in a bang, but as the first moment of an ongoing big breath. So as space has expanded ever since, as time has flowed ever since, more and more and more complexity, conscious awareness, individuated abundance and diversity has been able to be experienced by its mindful reality. And so now I love to speak about when we breathe, our universe is breathing through us in every moment. So as we breathe, we can perhaps remember the intimacy of our relationship with each other, with ourselves, with each other, with our planetary home Gaia, and our whole universe. And so at Whole World View, which I co-founded in 2017, to share this message, to serve the understanding and experiencing and embodying of unitive awareness at this time, to provide the evidence and invite the being into the doing of unitive action. We therefore speak of acting local, feeling global, and thinking cosmic. And on that note, I'd thank you, everyone, and pass back to Susan.
Wow. Thank you so much, Jude. So inspiring. A big breath. I'm brimming. It's so important to have people like you promoting that sense of interconnected self-awareness from this really expansive perspective, remembering and reigniting that sense of true wholeness. Exciting, inspiring, and powerful. It's grounded in the elemental while reaching into the unseen knowing. And I'm also actually thoroughly enjoying your book. So if this is more recommended holiday reading for people that are interested. Thank you. So now it is my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Tami Simon, founder of Sounds True, one of the world's largest multimedia companies dedicated to well-being and spiritual awakening, a true spiritual entrepreneur, working for decades to encourage others along that path. And she's going to talk about an inner MBA or whatever she likes for conscious business. Thank you, Tami.
Thanks, Susan. And Jude, how wonderful to enter the cosmic, multidimensional breathing world that you took us into. Thank you. And I can feel it in me. And I think all of us listening and tuning in have that ability and that open channel as we're connected into that field of infinite intelligence to feel how it expresses in us what wants to be born through us right now, here, in our lives and in these moments of our lives, with the resources that we have, with the connections that we have, with the gifts and limitations that we have, and the phrases that I want to bring to this gathering that occurred to me that are important to me at this moment are live with soul, be the magic every day. Okay, what's Tami talking about? This all sounds pretty fruity. I thought at least she was going to be a business person, and I am. And I think that's part of what we need are people who are inspired to create entrepreneurially, to do so, quote unquote, with soul, and to be the magic every day in their organizations. So I want to share a little bit what that means to me. What does it mean to be the soul at work, to live with soul at work? So first of all, it means I'm turned on by what I'm doing. I really care about it, and I'm really alive in it, and it's animated and fresh for me. And that might mean that I'm changing. I used to be involved in this thing, and now I'm doing this thing, and something new's happening, and I want to work with these people, and this is the truth of what's alive for me now, and I'm not just going to inherit some old form. Susan, you mentioned the Inner MBA, which is a 9-month certification program on the inner skills of business that we've created at Sounds True. And at our very first graduation, our speaker was Lynn Twist. And she talked about the very first time she heard Buckminster Fuller give a talk. And it was almost 50 years ago. And he said to the group of people, in 50 years, we're going to have to take this experience of interdependence that we know and sense and remake all of our organizations, all of the structures of our society, including business, to reflect that interdependent knowing that is in our cellular makeup. We're going to have to reconstruct our business life. And to me, when I think of living with soul as a business person, it's that recreation process. I think this is just really simple. This is me here talking to you. Susan gave me permission just to speak from my heart, and that's what I'm going to do. I think of the empty sheet of paper. I'm not going to inherit what people told me business was like. That's not going to work for me, and it never has. To be honest with you, it's never worked for me to do what supposedly, my gender was supposed to do or say, or my age was supposed to do or say, or so many ways that societal that to me is not living with soul. That's like living with some inherited status quo. And instead, there's something about the blank sheet of paper that says, how do we want to create this? I was just talking to a woman in our Inner MBA class who had to leave a corporate job. And she was like, I had this question, like, where am I going to go? Are there going to be businesses that reflect my values? Does this exist? And I was like, yeah, we're making them. We're creating them. And that's, in my view, what it actually means to be a spiritual entrepreneur, is that picking up of the blank sheet of paper and saying, how do we want to structure ourselves? What values do we put right at the center? How do we view money as a positive flow, a river, a current of energy that is moving through our organization for collective good? How do we create that kind of gentle and loving and empowering relationship with money and finances through our work? The how of it. How do we treat each other at work? We've mentioned a couple of times the power of starting a session like this with a minute of meditation and silence and connecting in space. What if we did that, and we do this at Sounds True, and we do it within our Inner MBA as well? What if we simply did that at the beginning of every single meeting for a few minutes? It's really simple. You can just call it centering. It doesn't even have to sound like some controversial, provocative, spiritual act, but it is actually, because you're creating space for people's soul nature and soul knowing to be welcome at work and included in the conversation. Be the magic every day. What does that mean? Jude said we're living at a threshold moment. This is a moment that is inviting us to draw on all of our creative capacities. We are such, when I say magic, what I mean is unexpected things. I'm so excited to see who I'm going to meet in this group. I've never been part of the Nova Institute events before. There are so many new possibilities here. Being the magic, to me, simply means, it's really simple, being open to that. Listening, receptive, filled with possibility. Businesses that are filled with possibility. What wants to happen? What might happen? What might happen that we never expected could happen? What could we create? Because now I'm connecting to this new person, this new person, this new person. There are all these new elements in the room, and an alchemy happens that we never expected. To me, that's what it means to be the magic. And in the Inner MBA program, the last thing here I just want to say is we focus on 3 different aspects of transformation. The first 3 months, we focus on the vessel that we are. The vessel that we are. Knowing that you can't possibly try to manage other people if you don't know how to manage yourself. And so it's, are we actually an open vessel? Are we aware of how to work with our own nervous system? Are we committed to our own health and the health of the people in our organizations? That's part 1. Part 2, how we work with each other, our relationships. How much feedback are we taking in? How are we collaborating? It's the notion of tremendous collaboration and teamwork. That's the second part. And then the third part is actually restructuring the organizations themselves, and be willing to do that and go back to first principles of how we relate with each other. And I bring all of this up to have business be part of, it's part of the tree. When we talk about the deeper roots of transformation, here we are, we're sunk in deep to our connectivity, and now we're organizing, we're working with each other. Resources are flowing in so that we can bring services and contribute to society. May that fruit be glorious. May it taste really good. May it be nourishing for people. May it be equitably distributed. We have the possibility, when we're rooted deeply, to have the tree of our organization be that kind of life-giving tree. And I'm so happy to be with you and to let this magic unfold here together.
Wow. Well, Tami, thank you. I think you've inspired all of us to be the soul, be the magic, be alive, be open, and be our true selves, our real selves. So thank you again. Your work has nourished and inspired countless people. And I really encourage people to go to Sounds True. Tami may interview some very inspiring people, but one of my favorite was when she spoke from her own perspective recently. So I really recommend that. So next, and continuing the theme of inner transformation, I'm delighted to welcome Leon VanderPol. He's the founder of the Center of Transformational Coaching, who has worked for decades on the deeper roots of transformation. So it's wonderful to have you with us here, Leon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm just sitting, as I mentioned when I came in earlier, just being in awe of the experience in total. And then after hearing the 3 of you just paint such a picture. You know, I know we all feel it. I can feel every single person in this room is just sitting in that energy. And I wonder what is left to say. but there is little left to say. I'll do my best to shine a light on the piece that is really important in the work that I do. So yes, I'm the founder of the Center for Transformational Coaching. My work for a very long time has been to sit in the most intimate spaces with other human beings and to be able to create spaces in which they can really open the fullness of their life to me. And this is what we teach at the center. There is something extraordinary going on in this world, and you've all been speaking to it. There's a birthing of something. And there are many people who are on what I'm calling a journey of personal awakening and transformation. And it really is a journey. It really is a journey. But what I've learned too is that transformation isn't inherently somehow like a bed of roses that we awaken and the world just becomes this magical place all of a sudden. It actually takes us into the core of ourself and into a part of ourself that is shadowy and dark. And I'll speak a little bit more about this. And the journey itself is beginning to also trigger a kind of sense that there is more to who I am, more to this life than I've perhaps ever known, but it's not clear what that is. And it's not clear how I'm to act in this world. And I'm hearing all this inspiring stuff and it speaks to my soul, it speaks to my spirit. I want to go into it, but I don't know how. I don't know what this means. I'm confused. And so the old ways of the world pull and the new emerging world beckons, and they're kind of caught in this dynamic. And I think more and more people on this planet are beginning to find themselves in this space and are seeking out in different ways answers, guidance, support, to kind of enable them to lean into this journey, which inherently is an unknown, open-ended, mystery, magical space to exist in. But because it's so uncertain, it generates trepidation, fear, doubt, those old companions that we all carry, and that inhibits people. It has them pull themselves back from the edge of taking giant leaps into this unknown that we are all able to perhaps perceive, but they cannot yet fully grasp or even trust. So today I wanted to shine a little bit of a light because we're talking about these deeper roots of transformation, to really kind of look at it at a kind of micro scale. And we're talking about what we as human beings are experiencing. And one of the pieces that I'll share with you is this idea that transformation is much more than change. Transformation and change, often these two words get used in sort of the same context, but change is something that we all experience just by virtue of living. We can change every day. We can grow every day. We can experience life in different ways every day that cause some kind of change to happen internally, externally. But transformation is deeper. It's a fundamental restructuring of our sense of self and our purpose and place in this world. A fundamental restructuring of our sense of self. And what we don't often understand is where that sense of self kind of comes from. So in psychology, there's a term called the self-concept. And our self-concept is actually a learned, kind of conditioned, if you want to call it acquired, sense of who we are. That's kind of ingrained into us from a very early age. And even Jude was speaking to these old paradigms that we were often raised in. And these paradigms still have a mighty grip upon the way that we all think about ourselves and our world. But this self-concept grows as we grow. I'm going to put a little slide up here just to give you kind of a glimpse of how I like to conceive of this self-concept. Just this idea that over time, we grow something that is not necessarily of who we are at our core, that sense of true self, that deeper nature. And we take on this kind of shell of ego, the beliefs, the values of our culture, of our family. I don't think we quite recognize the extent to which we are conditioned into a way of thinking, believing, and valuing in our worldview. I don't believe we really grasp the size of it. And yet this is so important, I think, when we talk about transformation, is that we begin to really recognize the degree that we have taken on so much that is not necessarily reflective of the essential nature of ourselves, this unlimited spirit, this unified consciousness that is inherently that. And we take on this shell of ego that begins to show us that we can be hurt, that we're not safe, that we need to develop a shell of protection around ourselves, that we need to be independent in this world, independent from each other, stand on our own 2 feet, make it happen. You know, all of that just kind of comes in. And every culture has that. And every society has that. Every family has that in different ways. And so what happens when transformation, this moment of awakening kind of comes, is people come in and sort of recognize, wait a minute, what's going on within this? What's going on within me? There may be more to me than I've ever recognized. There's more to me, more to life than I've ever recognized. But what that is this big unknown. And so there begins this dance, the dance of what I call awakening and transformation. And it takes people very slowly, very gently, and sometimes very abruptly, depending, into the core of themselves. They start to spend a lot more time on their own in reflection. And what they begin to notice is something that I call the dual dynamics of transformation, that there is this dual dynamics. So you probably have all heard of the image of the butterfly, the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. And there's a death process in there where the caterpillar dies. It's not a morphing. It doesn't become a butterfly, it dies. And there's this primordial goo in which this new cell of possibility pops up. And at first, that primordial goo of the dying caterpillar kills that. And then another cell pops up, and a primordial goo jumps on that. And so there's this dying process and a set of self-preservation process happening in the dying caterpillar. Every time this new cell of possibility, we'll call it the cell of the emerging butterfly, pops up. But in time, those emerging cells join together, and this creature called a butterfly is born out of it. So it's not a morphing process, it's a death and rebirth. And in humanity, in human beings, we have this same kind of thing that we may not recognize is there. And I just want to put this on because, and I know I'm coming close to my time ending, but this is so essentially valuable when we talk about the how do we make transformational change. For me, it begins so much at an individual level, that when each of us commits to this path within ourselves, to really examining and exploring these dynamics. And so we've got this kind of gravity, I'll call it personal gravity, that holds us back, that keeps us from flourishing into our full self. And it's born of our ego-based self-concept and those layers and layers of crusty old self. And we have this inherent dynamic that is moving us towards an enlightened self, a self-actualized self. And these two are kind of in that interplay of the death and rebirth. They're kind of, going at each other, if you will, or at least you could say the old cells are trying to pull down the emergent. And the old cells, like there's a lot of stuff there. I just want to put this slide up because this is the part of my work that I relish the most, is when people are truly willing to reveal this and to give voice to it. And there's a lot here on this slide. There's a lot of pattern of ego that we all carry. There are these innate impulses of our humanity that we can call our shadow side, the impulse towards greed or control. And there are all the conditioned ideas about who we are and our worth and our value, that we don't belong, that we're not good enough, that we're not safe. I mean, this stuff goes so deep, and many, many people carry it at a core level. It is built into the cells of their body. And we say, well, just grow beyond it. It is not that simple. They have to go on this incredible journey of healing. So they're healing consciousness. They're healing their own consciousness. And as they do that, they begin to emerge as the butterflies in these images we're seeing show. They begin to emerge as that one which is healed, and they can go into the world and truly act from that because they themselves at a core level have reached that space. It emerges of its own accord. You don't have to tell people to see oneness. Oneness reveals itself in the healed mind. And so I just want to share this in closing. Don't ever hesitate to lean in to all of that gravitational stuff in your own life. It may not seem sexy. It may be hard because it is. But I tell you, when you willingly face this with an open heart and in a trust that when you lean in, you will emerge as someone who simply can see the path towards what we are talking about today. It will emerge from you as a natural act of your creative abilities to create unified fields of possibility for others, to create businesses, as Tami is speaking to, that create extraordinary potentials for others. All of this emerges because you heal yourself. You heal yourself. So I'll end there. I have a feeling I went a little bit over my time, but just wanted to say that.
Absolutely
Thank you.
amazing, Leon. And now I know why, we chose the butterfly. It sounds simple. So these perspectives, expanding our sense of self, and the tools to do this are just so vital for our societies to heal and evolve. And the more people that can move into this awareness, the closer that we can get to this collective shift in consciousness that we're all needing. And so thank you so much. And next, it's my pleasure to invite the wonderful, the beautiful, and often unexpected Paul Dieppe, Nova Scholar and Emeritus Professor of Wellbeing at the University of Exeter Medical School, to talk about a topic that we rarely discuss when we talk about the meaning of life, and that is death. So Paul is going to explore this ultimate question. Thank you so much, Paul, for taking this one on.
Well, thank you, Susan, I think, although trying to follow those speakers is an impossible task. So I'm very cross with you, really, for putting me on after those three. That is not fair. So there are indeed many different scientifically inexplicable phenomena that have been observed in relation to death. And I just want to mention 4 of them that are particularly well documented and particularly well researched. The first is called terminal lucidity, and is a remarkable phenomenon where people with severe dementia appear to return to normal state of memory and consciousness just before they die. Very well documented, quite extraordinary. The second is the pre-death experiences, where people just before they die talk about entering a new loving light world, or meeting dead loved ones just before their own death. The third is near-death experiences, where people who die, often of something like a cardiac arrest, have amazing experiences of another world full of love and light, or they observe everything that is happening to their body in a different place and can describe it very accurately afterwards. And the fourth are the so-called shared death experiences, where one person is dying and they communicate with relatives far away, or there's persistent communication in some cases with a loved one after their death. And these things do very clearly challenge our materialistic, isolated view of the world. But having said that, one aspect, I think, of the human being human is that experience always trumps knowledge. So we can know things, but experience overtakes that and trumps it and makes us think completely differently. So I have actually experienced 2 of these phenomenon, both occurred when I was in a somewhat stressful situation, which may be relevant or not, I don't know. So I was being held hostage for a while in 1990, and I had both something that was quite close to a near-death experience, and I had a shared death experience. And bear with me, I'm just going to very briefly share those with you. So my nearly near-death experience occurred very soon after I was first taken off a plane that was trying to refuel in Kuwait when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And a small group of us were hustled out onto the tarmac by a couple of Iraqi soldiers carrying Kalashnikovs, and lined us up to shoot us. And one person next to me said, "Oh my God, they're going to shoot us dead." And I agreed, and I suddenly realized that I was actually going to be shot dead. And at that moment, I had the most extraordinary and wonderful experience I think I've ever had. I suddenly was aware that I was a part of something much, much bigger, something that was full of love and light and beauty, and I needn't worry about a thing, because it was so much bigger and better and beautiful than anything I'd experienced. The so-called noetic experience, if you like, there's very many other terminologies for that type of experience. I have absolutely no idea how long it lasted. The next thing I knew, I was being shepherded onto an airport bus to take me to another building. Now, my shared death experience occurred a couple of months later when I was being held in a small bungalow in Kuwait docks with 6 other men. And I was trying to keep a diary. I'd found some paper and pencils in the bungalow and was trying to keep a diary of what was going on, and quietly writing on that one morning when I had a sudden overwhelming feeling of grief and sadness, and a sense that my father was trying to contact me. It was a very bizarre experience. I stopped writing my diary. I never wrote in that diary again. And for that day and most of the next day, I felt absolutely awful. Now, following that, this was a long time ago. It was before we had things like the internet or ways of communicating. So we didn't know what was going on, and nobody at home knew what was happening to us. But I kept that diary. So when I got home 3 months later, I found out my father had indeed died, and he had indeed died on that exact day, pretty much at that exact time. Now, that is an experience that shook me quite a lot, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I'm one of a perhaps small but not inconsequential number of people who've had these experiences. So how do we deal with these things? And as I say, the experiences are much more powerful than the knowledge. So I think it does mean that it is impossible to maintain a purely materialistic view of the world, or adhere to the philosophy of people like Daniel Dennett, who say we're just isolated pieces of meat, and our brains produce our consciousness and there's no more to it. And it's very depressing that that worldview, although challenged by everybody at this meeting, still has a lot of influence. And we need to change that clearly. But experiences like this make it completely impossible to persist with that view. Although, of course, I, as a doctor previously, had held that view. So the second thing is the consequences. So most people who've had a near-death experience or a shared death experience are profoundly changed by them. They are transformed in a way, as Leon described, transformation. And that happened to me too. Once I'd recovered, which took quite a long time, and processed what was going on, I moved away from biomedical sort of laboratory type stuff in my work. And with the help of many people and institutions, including this wonderful Nova Institute, was able to switch my research interest to caring and healing. So that was a true personal transformation. So death is the ultimate transformation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I know that your words have really touched many people here, and you are a great inspiration to me personally. And I think this question is something that I feel that we should discuss more in perhaps a campfire or something at another time, because I think this is such an important issue. We had invited somebody to talk about their own near-death experience. They had technically died. They weren't available today, and we were also going to hear from someone who works with heart transplants, and how the consciousness of the donor and all of their preferences are somehow transferred. So some really important questions of consciousness I really hope we can explore more in the future. So now it's my delight to invite our dear friend, the wonderful Blake Pollan from the University of Toronto, who will talk more about this ongoing theme that's been throughout the conference of sacred reciprocity. Thank you so much, Blake.
Thank you, Susan, and what a delight to take all of this in, and an honor and humbling context of what we've just heard. It's hard to know in some ways how to follow from what we've just heard. So thank you so much for curating such a beautiful and impactful space for us to explore these important themes. what I'd like to do today is push a little bit on some of the conversation we've been having about sacred reciprocity and the need to decolonize ourselves from what some people are calling modernity more broadly as a label. And whereas sustainability is often framed as a technical or a political or behavioral or an attitudinal issue, I start with this question of what if sustainability is in fact a relationship problem, having fallen out of right relationship with ourselves, with each other, with the more than human world. And this, of course, is not something new. It's something that's been broadly pointed to by what has been called the relational turn in sustainability science that has been so well mapped out by Simon West and colleagues in this and other papers. And it's one that's pointed to frequently by our Indigenous colleagues who talk about the deeply relational worldview that inhabits most Indigenous worldviews. And I want to take that a little bit further by referring to the work of two people in particular that are shaping my thinking these days. Martina Artman from the Center for Urban Human Nature Resonance for Sustainability, and I'll talk a little bit more about what she seems to mean by resonance, and Vanessa Andreotti, who's the Dean of Education at UVic here in Canada. So I wanted to point to some of the work that Martina Artman has been doing. She takes as her point of departure calls for a relational turn in sustainability, and combined with Indigenous worldviews emphasizing the need for living in sacred reciprocity. And building on the ideas of Rosa and Barad, she argues that concepts of resonance offer promise for rethinking and overcoming what she refers to as the muting of human-nature relations. So following Rosa, she posits that resonance of this kind presupposes four things. First, a recognition of the intrinsic as opposed to instrumental value of the more than human world. Secondly, a respect for material limits. In other words, nature can be visible and accessible without making it constantly available for human use. Thirdly, an openness and capacity to listen and respond to the aliveness all around us. And finally, an essential capacity for self-awareness, self-empathy, and sense of intrinsic self-worth, without which an outward unconditional regard is not possible. Together, these amount to what she calls a reciprocal human nature partnership based on responsive resonance. And this, in some ways, has been also termed, predating her work, animism, which for 98% of human history has been the normative consciousness, not as a concept or idea, but as a way of being, feeling, and existing. It's really only in the last 500 years with enlightenment, as we heard earlier in a presentation, that this notion of dead matter has become dominant and consonant with the emergence of a form of Western modernity that normalizes ownership and appropriation of nature as a vehicle for the sickly concentration of wealth as an end in itself. And I want to quote here from a piece, a May 9th episode on animism in the Emerald podcast, because I found this just so beautiful. And what he's saying there is what I want to convey here is a feeling of deep, tingling, breathy relationality that exists between us and the land and the sky, the rivers and the oceans around us. A feeling that is so fundamental, so familiar, so primal, so foundational that we wander like lost children without it. And that it might just be the thing that saves us in the end. And if you've spent any time overnight in nature, you might recognize this. It's where nature ceases to be a backdrop, ceases to be scenery, and becomes the mythos within which you move, think, and breathe, where you interact with that world directly. Being becomes something that is an agreement somehow between you and the world, a confluence, a meeting place where everything is alive. And that how do we come by these sensibilities in the context of what was described in an earlier talk as the soup that we swim in terms of the ego consciousness that we've been conditioned into. In my own case, it was somewhat accidental. It was the result of coming to care for and eat from a permacultured yard that we took a 1950s bungalow and took into a vibrant food landscape. But how is that supposed to happen for so many others? When we live in this house that modernity built, as Vanessa Andreotti and the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures group describe it, with all of its fallout and collateral damage, and furthermore the affective elements that sustain and inhabit modernity and that inhabit us, the ways in which manufactured scarcity and fear translate into compensatory desires for accumulation, safety, and control, and predictability, and perceived entitlements. And so how do we then encounter what she refers to as the four socially authorized denials, the denial of the systemic violence and complicity and harm that supports our comforts and privileges and securities, the denial of the limits of the planet, the denial of our entanglement with living wider metabolism that is biointelligent, and the denial of the magnitude and complexity of the challenges we need to face together. And I think it's significant that she calls these socially authorized denials. And we see this in our work. I think a lot of what inspires us in this conference is a calling out of this and a calling into another space. But we also face this issue of how do we approach this in education. Many of us are in higher education, and we face these kinds of pressures to not talk about negative things that might demotivate people or cause them to feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable or immobilized or anxious. And so how do we bring this forward and create a context that can hold people in this liminal space where we have one foot in the old modernity and another foot in something that is still in emergence. And Vanessa's written extensively about this from her perspective. It's also something that we've grappled with. I've had the good fortune to co-chair a Canadian task force on ecological determinants of health education and the health sciences. We have this current project where we're inviting champions of curricular reform to do some collaborative autoethnography journaling with us. And we invite them to talk about their own learning journeys and how they support the learning journeys of others, and what inspires them and what they find difficult. And this is ongoing work. I think I'll just wrap it up there, but to say that this is something that we're very much grappling with and wanting to understand better. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Blake, for all your contributions, not just to this session, but to our communities in general, and for introducing four-letter words like love into the academic literature for a more evolved social authorization. So thank you so much for that. Now, we're running a little bit behind time, but I do want to open the floor for perhaps just 5 minutes of reflections, comments, because it's so important that we do give people this opportunity to contribute. So I just want to invite, if there are any comments or questions from anyone else who'd like to add to the conversation.
So I liked the comment earlier that somebody made about how you have curated this symposium, and I really feel it is a curation. It's been breathtaking. Today we've explored life, death, love, and hope, a lot of neuroscience, vitality, flourishing, forgiveness, and non-local consciousness. So I'm blown away by Tami's mandate: be the magic every day.
Well, thank you so much, Bud, for that. I really think it's wonderful to get that feedback. Is there anyone else who would like to add anything? I think it's wonderful to get that feedback. Is there anyone else who would like to add anything?
Would I be able to hop in here? My name's Hillary.
Of course, Hillary, please.
My video is off. I'm quite sick today, so I'm more in listening mode.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I just was really appreciative of everything that was said. I love this idea of the unity of everything. I'm doing a doctorate in business administration. I'm just starting in reimagining capitalism, and having trouble finding theories that really meet my spiritual basis, because as opposed to leadership, there's some amazing work there. I really want to do the fundamental change, which Tami was talking about, the transformative change, really moving away from shareholder primacy, from profit maximization as being the prime reason of business, which it's taught in sort of conventional business schools, of course. And I just wanted to ask if any of your panelists have thoughts on directions to point me to in terms of really being able to bring that academic and spiritual and the actual purpose of business, moving away from, shareholder maximization. I'd love any thoughts that people have. Thank you so much.
First of all, I will ask some people to respond to that if they like to, but I do refer you to our first session. We had a wonderful talk by Stuart Wallace about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. And there are many people now working in this space, but I will see if anyone else has got any comments.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, Hillary. Just to say that Stuart and I are working together with other change makers and especially John Fullerton of Capital Institute, who is a regenerative economist, together with people like David Corton of Eco-Civilization and Rick Clugston of Earth Charter, and others who are very much in a perspective of trying to see whether we could transform economics from the old paradigm to a unitive perspective, which of course is regenerative. So John Fullerton's website, the Capital Institute website, does regenerative course. The other area to look for is the work that Bill Reed is doing of Regenesis, who's also part of our circle. So we have about 30 leading edge change makers who are coming from a unitive perspective, who are working towards the transformation of economics at the moment. So I think over the next year, we'll make that much more public. But just to let you know, Hillary, it's happening. And the same with Tami is also taking place in terms of bringing a unitive awareness and unitive narrative to underpin and frame conscious business and spiritual entrepreneurship. And there are many leaders such as Tami who are working in this field as well. So my sense is, and I describe myself as a realistic optimist, I do see that so much has been happening, as it were, below the radar of these new shoots that we're sharing today. But my sense is that these will really be coming into the light of day so that we can link up and lift up all together during 2024. So that's my hope, my aspiration, and my trust. And being all together now gives me even greater excitement for those possibilities.
Thank you, Jude. And we've also got that Kate Rayworth's donut economics. I think it looks like Blake's added that link in the chat as well. Did anyone else want to add to that, or are we ready to move
Well,
on?
I might add one thing, that there are these theoretical frameworks around economics that are extremely helpful. And as a entrepreneur, as a business person, the B Corp movement has been incredibly helpful to me in terms of generating an operating framework at which justice is at the center, and the targets and metrics that you can measure. And at this point, worldwide, the number is approaching, I believe north of 10,000 companies that are either currently B Corps or are currently certified or in the certification process to become B Corps. That's a lot of businesses who are committing to these fundamental justice-based principles.
Thank you, Tami. And it's so encouraging there has been this shift. So Hope that's helpful, Hilary, and thanks for sparking some more conversation. Now we're going to move on to the final talks of the conference, and first to introduce Jessica Bockler, who has extensive experience in participatory arts facilitation, accessing our creativity and imagination for flourishing and social change. So welcome, and thank you, Jessica.
Thank you very much. I'm incredibly moved to be here. My father passed away not so long ago. So Paul, your story really, really touched me. And he was very much informing my own journey as someone convening spaces for change, drawing on the arts, yes, very much, but also drawing on spirituality and transpersonal and integral psychology. So I'm a co-founding director of the Aleph Trust. We're a global higher education provider, and we offer courses in consciousness studies, in spirituality, in transpersonal psychology. We run MSc and PhD programs in those areas. They're validated by UK universities, and gosh, yes, we're in the higher education space, and we are trying to re-enchant the academy. That's how I would put it. And we're also hosting something that we're calling the Conscious Community Initiative, which is really a research hub presently involving some 375 global members who are engaged in projects that are exploring the intersections of inner work and systemic change. And I'm actually going to be focusing on this particular piece today. I want to showcase an inquiry that we undertook between 2020 and 2022. And this is really what I'm pulling out are some headlines from that inquiry, but we also have a full report on this, and you can access that report by going to the Aleph Trust website and by having a look at our publications there. So let me tell you a little bit about what we did, and then I'm going to share some of the results from that work. So between 2020 and 2022, we conducted this inquiry involving multiple case studies which focused on the experiences of change facilitators working in 12 projects in Mexico, in South Africa, in Romania, Pakistan, Ireland, and the UK. And areas of work included permaculture, integrative education, yoga therapy for labor rights activists, and also nature-inspired therapeutic and community interventions, which involved a lot of creativity and the arts. And we sat in circle with the project leaders to explore their beliefs and their values and how these translated into action in their projects and how they experienced the processes of holistic change facilitation in their work. And we very much focused on examining the interior, the psychological dimensions, as well as the contextual and distractual factors that enabled and supported their work or undermined their work. And I want to share some of the key findings of that work with you. And it completely resonates with everything that's been explored and expressed in the room today. So it feels very, very resonant to be here and to have this opportunity to share this with you. So some of the key findings from this inquiry really affirmed that holistic change follows natural cycles and seasons. That when we engage in holistic processes of change facilitation, nature becomes our teacher. And we recognize that when we can let our projects unfold in accordance with natural rhythms, then there can be this organic unfolding and flourishing. And often we find that this is not how systems are set up. Usually there are fixed timetables, there are fixed budgets and budget constraints, and those do not reflect the sort of natural ebbs and flows of human energy and of the energy of these projects. So there are implications really for how we run our daily operations, how we budget, how we build project timetables, how we look after ourselves, that commissioners and funders really need to take on board. And another point I want to make is that holistic change also really requires this deeper engagement with sources that go beyond the self, beyond the egoic self. And this really means engaging a multiplicity of human faculties, excuse me, beyond the cognitive, really tapping embodied knowing, emotional knowing, spiritual knowing. And many of these ways of knowing are presently undernourished, and we need to really prioritize them in our work. And this also means working with and recognizing the archetypal dynamics that are at play in change facilitation. Because when we engage in processes of transformation, the archetypal dimensions of our being are engaged. Consciously or unconsciously. And we tend to get caught up in them and in prevailing archetypes that are finding unconscious expression if we are not actively engaging in those deeper streams of consciousness in our work. One example of that would be the archetype of the martyr, which is very prevalent in many people who are undertaking or engaged in processes of change facilitation. They're constantly giving without taking care of themselves. And of course, that leads to burnout. And we see that very much in the health professions, the social care professions, the teaching professions, and so on. There's a lot of burnout. And there's also this need really then to open and to release to the unknown, to actively engage with the unknown, to develop skills, to become skillful in navigating the unknown. I would almost call it a form of channeling. We're making this effort to awaken to the full spectrum of our senses and sensibilities, open our awareness, listen, deep listening, that's been said today already, and to explore new ways of sense making, to give the kind of emerging impulses and insights their fullest expression. And that also enables the fostering of collective intelligence, the emergence of collective intelligence between us. So it's not just an individual journey, it's very much a collective and interconnected journey. The other piece I want to acknowledge today, before I round off, is the many challenges and shadows that we face in change facilitation. They really need to be acknowledged and better understood. And they revolve around navigating clashes with prevailing mindsets and systems, because these can be very deeply disempowering for people who are working on change processes. They also revolve around shadows of privilege and shadows of manipulation and extractivism. And these shadows can be present in our work, and we may not be aware of them. We're not aware of the lenses that our own privileges often instill within us. So there's a strong need for peer support, for a supportive community that helps us see more of ourselves as we engage in processes of change facilitation. One of the key points is around a great need for self-regulation and co-regulation, seeing ourselves more fully as change facilitators. And I just say one last sentence, and that is to say, we are recognizing that holistic change agency requires supportive community. And we're starting a new round of our Nurturing the Fields of Change program, which is free. So you're welcome to join that, and maybe the link can be shared for the registration for that. Thank you so much for giving me the time to speak here. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. And I think that you really articulate the joy and sense of belonging that people experience. And I think it's so encouraging that global bodies such as the WHO are really recognizing these aspects of collective health now too. So, and thank you so much. So next, it's very important that we listen to the voice of our youth. And I'm so pleased to invite Cindy, a student from MIT who has been leading a program of cultural transformation for planetary health on campus. She's also been an intern with me on the Constellation Project. So welcome, Cindy.
Thanks so much, Susan. It's great to be here today. So yeah, I guess I'll just be providing some brief remarks today about sort of my perspective as a student advocate on campus, as well as sort of in this broader global community of planetary health, addressing questions of sort of deeper transformation in the context of the climate crisis. So I guess among young people, we really noticed this sort of conceptual and intellectual awareness of the climate crisis being at an all-time high. Yeah, I think sometimes there's still this gap in terms of a shift towards tangible and collective climate action. And why is that the case, really? I think part of it is rooted in this question of behavioral and cultural change that we've been trying to address through our work. When we talk about these sorts of very deterministic climate projections, whether that's global warming or biodiversity loss or all these other sorts of visions of our future, I think there's sometimes a sense of inevitability associated with these projections and a resulting sense of hopelessness that comes in sort of the way they frame sort of your upbringing and your future. I think one thing we've been really curious about is sort of, can these kinds of models be coupled with different tools and outlets that not only make us think about the climate crisis, but also sort of allow us to feel and start this process of inner transformation. As a student who's been involved in these climate education movements on campus, I've noticed, among other things, a sort of sense of subconscious aversion to these kinds of big questions. I think it has to do with the fact that, as people have gestured here throughout their various presentations, it's not just that we're observing all these changes in the planet around us, but I think that these changes sort of indicate something to us about the way that our societies have been structured, our livelihoods have been structured, and sort of the fundamental unsustainability and untenability of those kinds of systems moving forward, which can be a really scary thing to grapple with. I'm just thinking of the US context specifically, where I'm situated, the recent sorts of ongoing racial reckonings that we've been having, thinking about COVID-19, about the Black Lives Matter movement, and about sort of all these questions of social justice that are increasingly becoming a part of the upbringing of a lot of young folks here. Also sort of these very like expansive and multimodal ways of thinking about how these sort of systemic oppressions have structured the social and political systems in which we live in, and how this all sorts of trickles down into issues of planetary health and issues of the climate crisis. So I don't necessarily have answers for how we begin to solve these problems, but I just sort of wanted to offer a few words about dialogue and sort of practices we've been employing to try to give young people the tools to critically process the climate crisis and its sort of connection to these deeper societal questions. So one example, like Susan mentioned, is the Cultural Transformation for Planetary Health series that I've been running here at MIT, along with other partners and along with the Planetary Health Alliance for the past 3 or 4 months now. And we're really framing this as sort of a series of open-ended dialogues and discussions around topics such as water rights, Indigenous knowledge systems, climate writing, really focusing on sort of a co-creative approach to the questions of planetary health and such. And sort of thinking about how engagement with planetary change in the context of cultural values, of community well-being, and of racial justice helps open up some of these spaces to discuss alternative narratives and alternative futures. Even just people reporting that after these events, they feel a bit more hopeful, a bit more connected, and a bit more refreshed in this very chaotic time in the world that we're experiencing. To us, that really feels like the starting point or like an impetus for moving from those kinds of inner and interpersonal connections to this sort of collective transformation. Separately from this work, I've also been involved in the youth committee for an educational learning center in Cambridge called the Aterah Center, focusing on dialogue as a tool for peace building and transformation. And I think for me, that's been a really powerful reminder of sort of the outlets that young people are really seeking to discuss big ethical questions of sort of spirituality, religion, life, death, all these big themes alongside other people in this sort of collective community and in this globalized context that also places an emphasis on social justice. So I guess sort of as like a couple high-level takeaways, this work has really convinced me of sort of the power that contemplative and reflective practices, when applied in community and in a collective context, the sort of power of these practices to mobilize collective action, sort of a more collective consciousness around environmental issues, among other issues for young people today. And sort of really the benefits within these practices of talking about sort of planetary issues as interconnected with health equity, with sort of racial justice, and with all of these other concerns that are really top of mind these days for young folks. And just mobilizing, I think, the moment that we're in to as an opportunity to sort of reimagine our worlds and our systems for better. And yeah, sort of, again, the power that critical dialogue offers in moving from this sort of individual to this collective lens. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Cindy. It's so important to us to have young leaders like you in this space, knowing that you're co-creating more positive and nourishing narratives, sharing with the inner development, philosophy, spirituality, and community in mind. This really does offer hope for all of us. Thank you so much. Now, our next three panelists are all invited faculty at the Nova Institute from very different walks of life, each working to change the story in their different ways, and each making an important contribution to our community. So first, we have Mona El-Sherbini, a medical doctor and founding director of the Narrative Medicine and Planetary Health at Cairo University in Egypt. And she's really, I think she's made a video for us, yes, but she'd like to say a few words just to introduce this. Over to you, Mona.
Thank you so much, Susan. And greetings of peace, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I'm talking to you from the land of peace, from Egypt, where we are witnessing a devastating humanitarian crisis. And there's no important time more than this to discuss love, respect, and shared common principles for planetary health and the common good. So I also invite you to take a look at the paper that we published recently under the title of Planetary Health and the Anthropocene Syndrome, and the Anthropocene Discourse, the role of Muslim religious leaders. So with this, I would like to showcase my video presentation, and after this, I'll be happy to receive any questions. Thank you. ultimately realizing the profound reality of this universe, where unity and diversity coexist harmoniously, embodying the interconnectedness and the sacred nature of our shared human experience. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mona, for sharing your soul and your magic with us. It's really beautiful. Thank you. So next we have our dear friend Dave Nelson, a savant, a man of immense range, a true integrationist who brings so much to our community. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here. I love these so much, the diversity of thoughts and opinions, and gets my mind thinking in so many different ways. I think a lot about, we talk about nourishing the seeds or having seeds of change. And I often wonder, what nourishes and what environments do we need to have in order for those seeds to take hold of whatever environment they're in and to grow well. And so I thought a little bit about that and what that can look like and how I can be more proactive in my journey towards the symbiocene. So, and what I just said, Dr. Jude said, she wants to offer a way home. And I agree with her. A lot of what I'm about to say really intersects well with what she was talking about. So I'm going to get right into the science, because I think that once we say, hey, the science supports us, we can say, hey, we can have the spirituality. So Bell's theorem in 1964, the implications of that is that non-local connections are real. Locality says, it states that objects only have directly influence in their immediate surroundings. Non-locality challenges those assumptions, suggests that there's a quantum world that operates in a really different way than what we interact with on a regular basis, but it affects us. And how this plays into planetary networks. So understanding how Bell's inequality philosophically aligns with the concepts of planetary networks and how our impact. What does that mean? It means we have to consider what we consider locally real and how entangled we are. So this is how we can bring the philosophy of Bell's theorem into thinking. We really need to think about this next one and maybe experience it might be a better way of saying it. The shift from materialism to potentially idealism as a framework of being. It's going to be a philosophical shift, exploring the transition towards considering consciousness as fundamental. So I echo what has been said before me in that ideology, and then the relevance, understanding how knowing if consciousness is fundamental, therefore we're all connected, how that could influence our approach to planetary health and sustainability, and it should create an immediate movement to togetherness if we understand that in the core of our being, and if that's the way that it is, but it requires us to think about it. Another thing we could do to nourish the seeds of change: learn an indigenous language. So, or at least one of the things that I'm doing to be provocative on my journey. The value of indigenous languages: they offer us unique perspectives for our understanding of the connection with the earth and with each other. They're non-temporal, they're more relational. And it helps us to understand our intersections with people, place, and planet better. So I've got an Ojibwe word here if you want to learn one really quickly, because I think this is a place right now that we're experiencing. It's Gikanu Amadi Wigamagong. Gikanu Amadi Wigamagong is a place. It's the Ojibwe word for school. But notice the relational aspect of this. The place where they teach each other. It's not one directional, it's bi-directional. And that's the relational. I keep hearing about relationships. That's the relational aspect. So I'm learning Ojibwe right now. So it's really fun. And I want to teach my kids. Interdevelopment goals. That's something that, a lot of people have talked about. We've got to do it. The importance of interoception, highlighting the significance of managing our complex inner experiences. And with what, Chris Lowry was talking about, the emerging work on the human effectome. Really important for us to move forward if we're going to make these connections to planetary health, exploring how interdevelopment relates to how we act towards the environment, nature, and each other, and how it changes our relationship to nature. And then I think it's really important to talk about this just really quickly: life beyond space-time. The materialists and reductionism, we're going to have to contend with this thing about now we're finding structures beyond space-time. The work of Nima Arkhani-Hamid and Juan Maldaceta, both from the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton. They're exploring and discovering structures beyond space-time. An example would be the amplituhedron. So this has profound implications for us to understand the nature of reality. And then we can move more into planetary interconnectedness, because this exploration will drive the confirmation that we are all connected, because we're connected even outside. It doesn't have to be locally connected. This is the point why I mentioned about, the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2022, and then the deepening our understanding about what happens outside that space-time boundary. So, it's coming. This is not just me. This is some of the most advanced physicists in the world. And then Gödel's incompleteness theorem in 1931 what are the limits of our understanding, and how it's impossible to have a theory of everything. There will always be statements that are true, but that can't be proven within that system. And so in that same vein, again, in the philosophy of this incompleteness system or theorem from 1931, we need to embrace diverse approaches. We need to emphasize the need to embrace diverse approaches in this web, because diversity gives us what we're looking for, which is a stronger connection to one another. And then finally, computational irreducibility. Nature's complex. It's so complex that there's no shortcut to predict the outcome. It has to play out in real time. We're observers. And this is what people were talking about. We need to explore our roles of observers and participants in this unfolding of nature. What does it mean to be an observer? And how are we a witness? Allowing the unfolding of nature to shape our approach to the planet and its health, which is our health. So, as was talked about by Marcelo, we need to resacralize the planet, because the planet is computationally irreducible, and understanding it as sacred makes complete sense, because we'll never understand the whole thing, even though we're witnessing its unfolding in real time. So we connect those concepts, and we're relevant. As was said before, we have the capacity to change who we are. And we need to see this through new eyes, like that quote from Proust. It's very important. And my little jingle I take with me all the time: I could love a little more today. That's a little phrase that I say to myself. So that way it just keeps me thinking about the right things.
Thank you so much, Dave. And thank you for emphasizing the need to be broad thinking, open-minded, and always looking for connections. So we're not only seeing the big picture, but we can feel more part of it. And that feeling part, it brings us to our final speaker, Aterah, Director of Programming at OSHA's Integrative Medicine and Planetary Health program at Harvard Medical School. She's going to talk about spiritual connections to nature for personal and social transformation. Thank you, Aterah.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Susan. And this has been absolutely amazing. I feel as though everybody who's spoken has kind of given us permission to tear down the walls and think totally differently. I feel as though this is a paradigm shift in the making. So I just want to thank everybody who's gone before me. And I feel as though it's given permission to say things that I might not have said otherwise. So I'm going to speak a little bit from my own experience, in the words of Paul Dieppe, where experience trumps knowledge. And I'm going to speak about Ecodharma. So there are 3 elements to Ecodharma as described by David Loy. He wrote the book on Ecodharma, and it's essentially a Buddhist response to the ecological crisis. He breaks it down into practicing in nature, clarifying the ecological implications of Buddhism. And that essentially means, how does non-separateness at the level of individualism relate to our sense of separateness from the world, the planet at large? And then the third is taking that understanding and turning that into eco-activism. So those are the 3 components of Ecodharma. I'm going to focus on the first one in terms of practicing. So speaking to some of the things that were said earlier, like Cindy, you spoke about the eco-anxiety that people experience. This is something that, how do we address that? There are lots of different ways. Practicing in nature is a very direct way, I feel, and that I have experienced, that brings you into contact with your own sense of something is wrong and I want to do something about it, but it's overwhelming. How do I do it? How do we actually literally build that interconnection from your own heart to what your actions can be? So there's a building of a bridge there. So I'm just going to share a couple of prompts and experiences that have helped me along in my journey. So one is, I've spent 20 years in a spiritual community, really practicing both individual and collective awakening. So there's a context there that I've come from. And alongside that, I've been pursuing studies and professional experience in environmental sustainability. So Ecodharma has really brought those two things together. And I feel as though it's connecting the head and the heart. And I loved what Mona shared earlier, those 18 inches between the head and the heart being the longest journey. And I feel as though what we need to do is keep chipping away at that sense of block between the head and the heart. And embodied practices in nature help that. It takes it from meditation being an inward focus, where obviously we're seeing through the mind, our emotions and our thoughts, and that sense of being separate as an individual is addressed. But practicing in nature itself, outside, you're engaging with all of your senses. Your focus is outward. So you're using your feeling, your hearing, your seeing. And there's something that happens there which helps dissolve that sense of separateness from the outside world. And there's certain ways that, the penny drops when somebody says something. So I'm on a retreat and I'm sitting there on the mountain. I'm looking across the valley, and the words of one of the teachers that are leading this retreat say, don't try and connect with that mountain over there, because the energy that's animating that mountain is the same energy that's animating you. So there's something about that closes that gap of trying to connect, because we don't need to try and connect, because that we're already prior to that, sense of disconnection. There is no connection that needs to happen. And I think in moments like that, you realize that you don't need to try and connect with something. So other experiences are like meta practice. I think, we referred to Thich Nhat Hanh earlier, where he talks about walking on the earth as if you're kissing the ground. And actually, every step you take, consciously feeling, I'm not walking on the earth. I'm in relationship with the earth. And there's something about that again awakens that bi-directional relationship. Often we walk through a forest, or where we are observers. We're walking through a forest as, almost aliens. But this kind of practice and this meta practice of extending gratitude for the flowers around you, the rocks, the trees, it awakens something else where you are no longer external to it. There is a bi-directional relationship that's awakened in that process. And one other thing that I'd just like to share is some of us may have heard of Joanna Macy. So she has been instrumental in supporting grief circles and truth mandalas. So we did one of these truth mandalas on this retreat that I went to recently. Very powerful, where you have 4 objects from the forest that we took. Like one represents anger, fear, I think loss, and one is uncertainty. So each individual takes one of these objects and relates to their own experience. Doing that in a collective helps you tap into what our collective experience is. And it's big. It's like the dimensions of those emotions, range from the love, the grief, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it. You feel it, and it's a lot to hold. And then going into the forest after that, there's something very raw about your experience engaging in nature. And what I have found in my experience in this particular context is you are open to the forest, to the natural world in a way that you aren't necessarily, and it's not divorced from our collective experience as human beings. So that, again, there's no separateness from our collective experience as humans and what you're engaging in nature. There's a certain vulnerability and rawness that you expose yourself to. And there's something that you can allow yourself to know experientially, a different way of knowing and being, which isn't just from the head. And following that, allowing your own intuition to guide you. And this is where, it may not be acceptable to say this in normal academic circles, but I think you actually start experiencing a different way of being and knowing, which is not just from the head. You can have an interaction with the natural environment, which has selfhood to it, and you can be guided by that. And I think that starts to change our relationship with nature. The indigenous peoples have got it right. We've spoken about that numerous times. That relationship with nature is embodied with spirit, aliveness. It's not inert. There's a bi-directional relationship and honoring of nature, because the indigenous peoples know it's not inert. It is sacred, as people alluded to earlier. And this awakens that sense of sacredness. And I think the last thing I'd want to just end on is, or 2 things actually. So often we hear about going into nature for the benefit of our health and well-being, but that's a transactional relationship. That's a very anthropocentric way of relating to nature. I think the way that, again, the indigenous peoples, it's not about getting something from nature. It's realizing we are part and parcel of nature. There's no getting. It's the spiritual kind of embodiedness that we then start to experience ourselves. So the last thing I will end on, Susan, is Robin Wall Kelmer. I love something that I learned from her book. What if we realized that the earth loved us back? To me, that really changes our relationship to nature. Like, oh, there's a sentient Gaia here that is just calling for us to awaken to the love that she has for us. So I just want to end with that, and thank you all.
Well, thank you so much, Aterah, for bringing ourselves into awareness of that inherent connectivity is so important, that place of compassion, kindness for ourselves and others. And I always enjoy conversations with you and the other NOVA invited faculty, and I want to thank all of the invited faculty who have contributed across the conference. Now, we do want to invite comments and questions, so please, the floor is open. Dave and Virginia.
I thought it was really cool, the thematic coherence throughout the conference, and especially this particular thing. It was very interesting to note there must be something going on in the background radiation of experience of soul that's propagating us to coalesce in this way and to say very similar things from different arenas and environments. It really makes my heart feel happy and my soul buoyant that change is coming, and it feels very optimistic that we're on the precipice of a new understanding of being. So I just want to thank everybody for the encouragement of just you being here and contributing. Just adds so much value to my life, just from a very coherent point, and the love is there. So just thank you very much. It's really wonderful.
Thank you, Dave. I echo that. And Virginia, I think you were trying to say something.
Point, and the love is there. So just thank you very much. It's really wonderful.
Thank you, Dave. I echo that. And Virginia, I think you were trying to say something.
I just wanted to also say thank you, and I'm in deep gratitude. I want to start, I'll start with everyone who has participated, both as a sitter, as a listener, and as a speaker, and most especially to Brian and Sue for birthing this organization and creating something that I completely think is miraculous. Yesterday I started, before I got and attended this, in a state of darkness with everything that was going on. And after the first session, even, I ended it up feeling that there was hope. And that's what I feel now the most, is a sense of hope, and that we're going to make it through. And that's a big statement for somebody who's been on the planet for 81 years. So thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. I think your words really reinforce the importance of these positive stories that we're telling, because it just shifts the mindset, doesn't it? The worldview. Thank you. Are there any final comments? Because otherwise we'll start to wrap up. Okay. So first, we know that many people were not able to attend all the sessions, and we hope that in the next week or so we will have all the recordings posted for you. We've really tried to provide a program, and I'm so glad that people have enjoyed it, that really underscored the interconnectivity and interdependence of literally every issue, while at the same time emphasizing the core common threads which bring us back to our shared humanity of relationship, of the need to invest in our inner resources to make these outward changes. This is so important to nourish these perspectives. We also invite you to continue the conversation on the hub if you have not already joined that. We post meditations and other things there as well. And we are going to continue to have interactive events like this in our campfires next year. Now, I want to invite Susan Berman to announce the winners of the Nova Art Awards. And we will try, Lachlan's got them ready, I think, to show some of the winning entries as she does this. So let's see how that goes.
I've taken over Brian's position here because we're sitting next to each other. Thank you to everybody. And thank you especially to all the artists who contributed, and to our Art Award judges, Judy Rollins, Sarah Warber, and George Kaplan. What a challenge to pick winners from these stunning entries we have all seen. So first of all, for open art, we're pleased to award first place to Tracy Joyner with this piece, Interwoven. Our judges loved the beauty of the different colors, like someone hugging the earth and all the beings. Warm, free, and flowing, with beautiful thoughts and feelings interwoven. Just beautiful. Second place goes to Heidi Fowler, somebody Brian and I have the artwork of and love, for her gorgeous illustration of this beautiful bowing tree. Our judges note that, rooted in earth, this tree bends in the wind with its greenery showing growth and resilience, while the branch looks to a new way. Truly an inspiration for us all. For open photography, we're thrilled to announce first place, can I have the next one, Lachlan? Thank you, was awarded to Erica Timko Olsen for the piece Harmony. Our judges loved this image and said it is elegantly framed and looking with grace forward. We look across the waters to a welcoming land. Technically, very good, an excellent photograph. Second place in photography goes to Tracy Joyner's Whispers of Resilience. The judges noted that the composition and message are all completely in sync in this stunning photo. The up-close view takes us into the mysteries of nature we often miss. This photo also embodies the essence of the conference, Seeds of Change. So thank you and congratulations to our winners.
Thank you, Sue. Now I would like to invite Brian Berman, President of Nova, to say a few words before we wrap up the meeting. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and outstanding job in curating and leading this conference. We give you a deep bow for all the work that you've done with this. And I want to also thank all the speakers as well, all of you who've been participating over the past 2 days. It's an amazing conference, and I want to acknowledge all the expertise and stories that have been shared, as well as the different backgrounds, perspectives, different parts of the world and storytellers have come from. At the opening of the conference, I mentioned how I'd been thinking about Duke Ellington and jazz music and how all of us coming together was an act of creative resistance, hope, and love. And these underlying themes have been in many of the presentations and discussions that we've heard over the past 2 days. And much like jazz music, each person's contributions have led to a wonderful symphony of ideas. And as Stuart Wallace said yesterday, it's good that we all have different points of view. We can even differ. These differences, they create creativity. And I noticed how over the course of the meeting, ideas have been riffed off each other, a crescendo of notes that spring from our values, our courage, and our optimism have evoked a new unitive music of positive change. And Mary Gentili and others spoke about the power that we had to make choices and co-create a different narrative about what's possible. So once again, my sincere thanks to all of you. My hope is that we will continue to work together and you'll continue to engage with us at Nova as we widen the circles in order to create a world where people, places, and the planet flourish. Thank you all.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. And I just want to add my final thanks to you and Sue and all of the speakers and everybody who's attended and brought your energy to this wonderful gathering. And special thanks to the people behind the scenes at Nova, especially Dawn, Erin, and Rick. And of course, Lachlan in the studio in Melbourne, who is literally working through the night to do this for us. Thank you so much. And last, but certainly not least, my partner in work and in life, Alan Logan, whose vision and broad knowledge has really helped shape this program. And so with that, we wish you all love and light for the holiday season. And we're going to go out with the 2-minute theme video that we created for the conference. It's just 2 minutes, and we'll roll that now, and then we'll just close off. So bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye, everyone.